Frank Mercer rose at 4:30 a.m., as he had for the past 17 years. The discipline of a former Marine never quite left him, even after transitioning to civilian life as a construction project manager. The modest colonial home in Westbrook, Connecticut, still dark and silent, felt different lately, colder somehow, despite the summer heat. Frank moved quietly through his morning routine, careful not to wake his wife, Denise. She'd been coming home late from her hospital shifts for months now, claiming extra hours and weekend rotations. As Frank dressed in his work clothes, he glanced at his sleeping wife, her auburn hair splayed across the pillow, the delicate line of her neck exposed. 17 years of marriage, 2 children, and countless shared memories. Yet lately she felt like a stranger. Their children, twins Trevor and Tessa, would be entering their senior year of high school in the fall. Over breakfast, Frank checked in with them about their summer plans while Denise slept upstairs. "Dad, can I take the car later? I promised Kylie I'd help with her college essays," Tessa asked, twirling spaghetti-thin strands of blonde hair, inherited from Frank, around her finger. "Sure, princess. Just be home by 9, Frank replied, sliding a plate of eggs toward Trevor, who was glued to his phone. "Coach says I need to put on 15 pounds before tryouts," Trevor mumbled without looking up. Frank nodded. "We'll adjust your meal plan. I'll pick up more protein after work." As the twins headed out for their respective summer activities, Frank lingered at the kitchen counter, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Something was off with Denise, had been for months. The late nights, the sudden work trips, the password changes on her phone. Frank's best friend, Dale Washington, had warned him during their weekly beer night. "Man, something's not adding up with Denise's schedule." The hospital administration office called looking for her last week when she was supposedly on shift. Frank had defended his wife then, but doubt had planted itself firmly in his mind. Today, he decided, he would confront her. But when he returned home that evening, covered in construction dust and mentally prepared for a difficult conversation, Denise had already left for what she claimed was another night shift. Frank poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and sat in their home office, staring at the family photos lining the bookshelves. On impulse, he opened Denise's laptop, a breach of trust he would have never considered before. To his surprise, it wasn't password protected. Her email was open, and what he found shattered the foundations of his life in an instant. Emails between Denise and Dr. Lawrence Whitfield, the new chief of surgery at her hospital, detailed not just their affair, but their plans to start a new life together. The most recent email contained a consultation with a divorce attorney, outlining a strategy to secure full custody of the twins by painting Frank as an absent, temperamental father with anger management issues stemming from military service. Frank felt the room spin as he read Lawrence's response. "Once we establish a pattern of his instability, the restraining order will be easy to obtain. His military background works in our favor. PTSD is our ace. I know a judge will be sympathetic. Just follow the plan, and we'll have our fresh start with minimal financial damage." With trembling hands, Frank downloaded and backed up all the emails to a secure cloud account. He then carefully returned the laptop exactly as he had found it and walked to the garage. There, surrounded by his tools and the motorcycle he had been restoring, Frank allowed himself to break, the first and last time he would cry over Denise's betrayal. When the tears subsided, something else took their place. Frank Mercer, the man who had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan, who had built a life from nothing after growing up in foster care, who had prided himself on being a dedicated husband and father, felt a cold clarity wash over him. If they wanted war, they would have won, but not the kind they were expecting. The next morning, Frank greeted Denise with coffee in bed and a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Late night? You must be exhausted," he said softly. Denise's momentary look of confusion was quickly masked. The ER was swamped. 3 car accidents came in back-to-back. Frank nodded sympathetically. "I was thinking we should take a family vacation before the kids start their senior year. Maybe that lake house in Vermont you've always wanted to try." The flicker of panic in Denise's eyes told Frank everything he needed to know. The game had begun, but only Frank knew the true rules of engagement. Chapter 2. The Architect of Ruin. Frank's controlled facade never slipped over the next 3 weeks as he meticulously executed the first phase of what he privately called Operation Scorched Earth. He withdrew small amounts of cash from multiple ATMs, opened a separate bank account under an LLC he created for investment properties, and met with his own attorney, one specializing in both family law and criminal defense. Miles Blackwood was not the type of lawyer advertised on billboards. A former prosecutor with an office in Hartford's historic district, Miles had been recommended through Dale's cousin, who worked in private security. Based on these emails, they're planning to blindside you with both divorce papers and a restraining order, likely when you're at work and unable to return home, Miles explained during their first meeting. They've already consulted with the top 3 family law firms in the county, a classic move to conflict them out so you can't hire them. Frank nodded, his expression neutral. What's our counter? Miles studied his new client carefully. Legally, we document everything, gather evidence of the affair, protect your assets within legal boundaries, and prepare for the custody battle. But Frank, I need to know, what else are you planning? Because I see something in your eyes that concerns me professionally. Frank's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm planning to follow the law to the letter, Miles. I just intend to use every legal means at my disposal to ensure justice is served. That's not entirely reassuring, Miles replied, but continued outlining their strategy. Meanwhile, Frank cultivated a new friendship with Philip Bennett, the hospital board chairman, after coincidentally meeting him at a charity golf tournament. Dale, who worked as an IT consultant for various medical facilities in the area, had orchestrated the introduction. Frank's company is looking to bid on the hospital expansion project, Dale had explained to Philip. He's got some innovative ideas about creating healing environments. Over 18 holes, Frank impressed Philip with his knowledge of healthcare construction, his military background, and his community involvement. By the end clubhouse drinks, Philip had invited Frank to submit a proposal and attend the hospital's annual fundraising gala the following weekend. Bring your wife, Philip insisted. Isn't she one of our nurses? Surgical nurse, actually, Frank replied smoothly. Working closely with your new chief of surgery. She speaks very highly of the hospital leadership. That night, Frank innocently mentioned to Denise that he'd met Philip Bennett while discussing a potential contract for the hospital expansion. He invited us to the gala on Saturday, Frank said, watching her reaction closely. Denise nearly dropped the plate she was drying. You met Philip Bennett? The board chairman? Nice guy? Terrible golfer, Frank chuckled. I told him we'd be there. It's important for my company, Denise. Of course, she replied, her voice tight. I'll have to check if I can switch shifts. Frank knew from the intercepted emails that Denise and Lawrence had planned a weekend getaway under the guise of a medical conference. Now they would have to cancel or risk raising questions. The night of the gala, Frank was the perfect husband, attentive, charming, proud of his wife's work at the hospital. He navigated the room with an ease that surprised Denise, connecting with board members, donors, and hospital executives. When Lawrence Whitfield approached them, Frank extended his hand warmly. Dr. Whitfield, finally we meet. Denise speaks so highly of your surgical innovations. I've been fascinated by your paper on minimally invasive cardiac procedures. Lawrence, a tall man with prematurely silver hair and calculating eyes, faltered momentarily before recovering. You've read my research? Of course, Frank replied. I make it a point to understand my wife's world. Your work is saving lives. That matters to me. Throughout the evening, Frank masterfully wove himself into conversations with Lawrence's colleagues and superiors, establishing himself as a thoughtful, well-informed professional with connections to the hospital's major donors. By the end of the night, he had secured an invitation to present his construction proposal to the board and had been asked to join the hospital's community advisory committee. In the car ride home, Denise finally broke. What are you doing, Frank? Since when do you care about hospital galas and research papers? Frank kept his eyes on the road, his expression neutral. I've always cared about your career, Denise. Maybe you've been too busy to notice. That night, Denise made a panic call to Lawrence from her car in the grocery store parking lot. Frank knew this because he had placed a small tracking and recording device under the dashboard, technically installed to test new safety features for the twins driving, as he had casually mentioned to Denise weeks earlier. He knows something, Denise hissed into her phone. He's suddenly everywhere, making connections with the board, charming everyone. This wasn't the plan. Lawrence's voice was tense, but dismissive. He's clueless, Denise. just sticking his nose into hospital business for a contract. Stick to the plan. The papers are ready. We move next week while he's at the Bridgeport site. Judge Calloway has assured me the emergency protective order will be granted based on the evidence we've prepared. Frank replayed the recording twice before sending it to Miles, and then continued building his own case and his intricate trap for the two people who had plotted to destroy his life. Chapter 3. The First Strike. On a muggy Thursday morning, Frank kissed his sleeping wife goodbye and left for what she believed was a major project meeting in Bridgeport. Instead, he drove to his lawyer's office, where Miles was waiting with a court reporter and two private investigators. They filed this morning, Miles confirmed, sliding a folder across his desk. Emergency restraining order based on alleged threats and erratic behavior. Judge Calloway signed it minutes ago. The sheriff is probably at your house right now. Frank nodded, unsurprised. And our response? Already in motion. Judge Harmon has agreed to hear our emergency petition this afternoon with the evidence we've gathered. The recording from Denise's car alone raises serious questions about false allegations. While Frank remained at the lawyer's office, giving his formal statement, Denise was executing her part of the plan, tearfully accepting the restraining order from the sheriff, changing the locks, and calling the twins home from their summer activities for a family emergency. What Denise didn't know was that Frank had prepared the twins weeks earlier. After discovering the betrayal, he had taken them fishing at their favorite spot, something they hadn't done together in months. "I need to tell you both something difficult," he had said as they sat by the lake. "Your mother and I are having problems. I believe she's planning to leave me for someone else." The twins had stared at him in shock, Trevor dropping his fishing rod. That's crazy, Dad," Tessa had stammered. "Mom wouldn't." Frank had shown them just enough of the emails to confirm the affair, careful to shield them from the more vicious planning. "I'm telling you this because things might get messy. She might say things about me that aren't true." "Like what?" Trevor had demanded, his voice cracking. "That I'm unstable, dangerous, that my military service left me with issues." Frank had maintained steady eye contact with both his children. "You know me. You know who I am as a father. I've never raised a hand to either of you or your mother. I've never even shouted during an argument. So what do we do?" Tessa had asked, tears streaming down her face. "For now, nothing. Act normal. I'm handling it. I just need you to remember the truth when the time comes." Now, as Denise gathered the twins in the living room to explain why their father wouldn't be coming home, spinning a tale of concerning behavior and threats, she was met with unexpected resistance. "Mom, this doesn't make sense," Trevor said flatly. "Dad's never threatened anyone. You don't understand everything that happens between adults," Denise insisted, her practiced speech faltering. "Does Dr. Whitfield understand?" Tessa asked quietly. The color drained from Denise's face. "What?" "We know, Mom," Trevor said. "About you and him. Dad showed us the emails weeks ago." "He had no right," Denise began, but was interrupted by the doorbell. A court officer stood on the porch, accompanied by Miles Blackwood. "Mrs. Mercer, I have an emergency order from Judge Harmon requiring the minor children Trevor and Tessa Mercer to appear in family court tomorrow morning. Until then, they are permitted to stay with their father at an approved location if they so choose." Denise snatched the paper from the officer's hand. "This is absurd. There's a restraining order against my husband, which Judge Harmon has temporarily suspended pending tomorrow's hearing, based on evidence suggesting potential perjury in obtaining the original order," Miles explained calmly. "The children are free to decide where they spend the night." Both twins immediately went upstairs to pack overnight bags, leaving Denise standing speechless in the doorway. By nightfall, Frank was settled in a hotel suite with the twins, ordering room service and trying to maintain a sense of normalcy while they processed their new reality. "What happens tomorrow?" Tessa asked, picking at her French fries. Frank chose his words carefully. "The judge will listen to both sides and make some temporary decisions about where you'll live and how we'll handle things until a final divorce settlement. And after that," Trevor pressed. "What's your endgame, Dad?" Frank studied his son, so perceptive, so much like himself. "Justice," he answered simply. "Not revenge. Justice." But as the twins fell asleep in the adjoining room of the suite, Frank stared out at the city lights, knowing that justice was only the beginning. Lawrence Whitfield and Denise had planned to take everything from him: his children, his home, his reputation. They would learn that Frank Mercer was not a man who lost wars, especially when he had nothing left to lose. In the darkness of the hotel room, Frank opened his laptop and reviewed the second phase of his plan. Operation Scorched Earth was just beginning. The initial strike had been defensive, protecting his relationship with his children and countering the false restraining order. What came next would be offensive, systematic, and without mercy. Chapter 4. Courtroom Revelations. The New Haven County Family Court was housed in a brutalist concrete structure that seemed designed to amplify human misery. Frank, dressed in a conservative Navy suit, sat beside Miles at the plaintiff's table while Denise and her attorney, an aggressive divorce specialist named Vivian Palmer, took the defense position. Lawrence Whitfield was conspicuously absent. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for zero tolerance for legal games, reviewed the files before her with a deepening frown. "Mrs. Mercer," she finally said, looking over her reading glasses, "I have serious concerns about the restraining order issued by Judge Calloway, particularly in light of this recorded conversation between you and Dr. Whitfield that appears to show premeditation in filing false claims." Denise shifted uncomfortably while her lawyer leaned forward. "Your Honor, we dispute the authenticity and legality of that recording. Furthermore, regardless of any personal relationship, my client genuinely fears for her safety." "Based on what evidence, Ms. Palmer?" Judge Harmon asked sharply. "Mr. Mercer has military training and access to weapons. So do thousands of law-abiding veterans," the judge interrupted. "I need specific incidents, not prejudicial assumptions about veterans." When no concrete examples were forthcoming, Judge Harmon turned to the twins, who had been waiting outside with a court counselor. She interviewed them privately in her chambers, then returned to deliver her ruling. "I'm vacating the restraining order against Mr. Mercer," she announced. "Furthermore, I'm granting temporary joint physical custody, with the children spending weekdays with their father to maintain school routines and weekends with their mother." She fixed Denise with a stern look. "Mrs. Mercer, I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach to these proceedings. False allegations are not taken lightly in my courtroom." As they exited the courthouse, reporters from the local newspaper and a regional TV station approached, tipped off by an anonymous source about a prominent doctor and hospital board controversy. Frank spoke briefly and carefully. "I'm grateful the court saw through these false allegations. I only want what's best for my children during this difficult time." Denise pushed past the cameras without comment, her face tight with fury. That evening, as Frank helped the twins settle back into their rooms at home, now legally his primary residence until the divorce was finalized, his phone buzzed with a text from Dale. "Phase 2 ready. Board meeting tomorrow at 4. Frank smiled slightly. The hospital board had called an emergency session after receiving an anonymous package containing evidence of Lawrence's affair with a subordinate nurse, a clear violation of the hospital's ethics policy, along with concerning documentation of 3 patient cases where Lawrence had potentially falsified records to cover surgical complications. The latter evidence had been meticulously compiled by Nurse Brenda Okafor, who had long suspected Lawrence of cutting corners but had been silenced by administrative pressure. Frank had connected with Brenda through Dale's network, offering her protection and legal representation in exchange for her testimony. "Just doing what's right," Brenda had insisted during their clandestine meeting at a diner 20 miles from the hospital. "That man shouldn't be operating on people if he's covering up mistakes." Frank's phone rang, Miles with an update. Lawrence Whitfield had been suspended pending investigation, and Denise had been placed on administrative leave due to the conflict of interest. Their carefully constructed professional lives were unraveling thread by thread. "Be careful, Frank," Miles warned. "They're cornered now. Cornered people get desperate." Frank thought of the twins sleeping down the hall, of the home he had nearly lost, of the life he had built through years of hard work. "Let them get desperate," he replied. "I'm ready." Chapter 5. Counterstrikes. Lawrence Whitfield paced the perimeter of his modernist glass house overlooking Long Island Sound, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. The suspension had been humiliating enough, but now the medical board was investigating 3 of his cases, and 2 former patients had contacted malpractice attorneys. His phone rang, Denise for the 5th time that hour. He sent it to voicemail, unable to stomach another of her tearful recriminations. This was all falling apart too quickly, too thoroughly to be coincidence. The doorbell rang, and Lawrence tensed. Through the security monitor, he recognized Philip Bennett's silver Audi in the driveway. Reluctantly, he buzzed the hospital board chairman into the property. "This isn't a social call, Lawrence," Philip said gravely as he entered. "The board has voted to terminate your contract, effective immediately." Lawrence's face flushed with anger. "Based on unsubstantiated allegations? I'll sue the hospital into bankruptcy." Philip placed a thick folder on the glass coffee table. "These allegations are far from unsubstantiated. 3 separate nurses have now corroborated the claims about falsified records, and the affair with Denise Mercer, while she was under your direct supervision, violates at least 4 hospital policies." "This is Frank Mercer's doing," Lawrence hissed. "He's systematically destroying my reputation because his wife preferred me." Philip raised an eyebrow. "Interesting theory. But Frank Mercer didn't falsify those patient records, Lawrence. You did that all on your own." He moved toward the door. "A word of advice? Hire a good attorney. The patient in the Henderson case is pursuing criminal charges for document falsification." After Philip left, Lawrence hurled his scotch glass against the wall, watching the amber liquid streak down the white paint like blood. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Breakwater Point. 10 p.m. Come alone if you want to salvage anything from this wreck. F." Lawrence stared at the message, adrenaline surging through his body. This was his chance to confront the architect of his downfall face to face. Meanwhile, Denise was facing her own crisis. Her nurse friends had stopped returning calls, the hospital had suspended her, and her children were increasingly distant, especially Tessa, who had found additional emails on Denise's laptop detailing plans to move the twins across the country away from their father. "You were going to take us to California without even asking us." Tessa had confronted her that morning, eyes blazing with hurt and betrayal. "It was just a possibility we were exploring," Denise had tried to explain. "We?" Tessa had echoed. "You mean you and Dr. Whitfield? The man you were cheating with while Dad was working 60-hour weeks to pay for my dance classes and Trevor's hockey." Now, sitting alone in her car outside the empty house, she could no longer legally enter without Frank's permission. Denise felt the full weight of her choices crushing down on her. Her phone chimed with a text, the same message Lawrence had received, directing her to Breakwater Point at 10 p.m. At 9:55 p.m., Lawrence arrived at the deserted rocky outcropping that jutted into Long Island Sound. The area was a local lover's lane by day, but deserted after dark except for occasional teenage partiers. Tonight, it was empty save for a single figure standing at the point, not Frank's broad-shouldered silhouette, but Denise's slimmer form. "What are you doing here?" Lawrence demanded as he approached. "Where's Frank?" Denise turned, her face tear-streaked in the moonlight. "I got a text to meet him here." "You got the same one." Before Lawrence could respond, headlights swept the parking area as another vehicle arrived. Both froze, expecting Frank, but instead were confronted by Vivian Palmer, Denise's divorce attorney, looking equally confused. "My assistant said you needed an emergency consultation," Vivian said, clutching her briefcase. "What's going on?" A fourth car arrived, Philip Bennett from the hospital board. Then a fifth, Judge Calloway, who had signed the original restraining order. As the confused parties gathered near the clifftop, demanding explanations from each other, bright lights suddenly flooded the area. Multiple vehicles had silently surrounded the parking lot, and uniformed police officers emerged, accompanied by 2 FBI agents displaying badges. Judge Martin Calloway, Dr. Lawrence Whitfield, Attorney Vivian Palmer, Mrs. Denise Mercer, and Mr. Philip Bennett, the lead FBI agent announced formally. "We have warrants for your electronic devices and documents relating to an ongoing investigation into judicial misconduct, medical fraud, and conspiracy." Frank Mercer was nowhere to be seen, but his presence was felt in every stunned face as the implications became clear. Somehow, he had gathered them all here, like pieces on a chessboard, to be captured in a single decisive move. Chapter 6: Collateral Damage. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Local news reported the FBI investigation, though no charges had yet been filed. Judge Calloway took emergency leave from the bench. Philip Bennett resigned from the hospital board, claiming health concerns. Vivian Palmer withdrew as Denise's divorce attorney, citing irreconcilable differences in case strategy. Frank watched the chaos unfold from a safe distance, neither gloating nor intervening. He had simply provided information to the right authorities, detailed documentation of Lawrence's medical fraud that had been building for years before Frank ever became involved, evidence of Judge Calloway's pattern of favorable rulings for Lawrence's previous divorce clients, financial connections between Vivian Palmer and Lawrence's medical expert witness service. None of it was fabricated. Frank had simply connected dots that were already there, waiting for someone with sufficient motivation to trace the pattern. But victory felt hollow as Frank observed the impact on his children. Trevor had grown quieter, channeling his emotions into brutal hockey practices that left him exhausted and bruised. Tessa had withdrawn from her usual social circles, her senior year beginning under a cloud of whispered gossip about her family's public implosion. Frank found her crying in the backyard hammock one evening, school yearbook clutched to her chest. "I was supposed to be yearbook editor," she said when she noticed him standing nearby. "I resigned today. Everyone keeps asking questions about Mom and Dr. Whitfield and the investigation. I can't take it." Frank sat beside her, the hammock swaying gently with their combined weight. "I'm sorry, Princess. I never wanted you and Trevor to suffer for their mistakes." Tessa wiped her eyes. "But Dad, some of this is because of what you did too. The FBI, the news stories, was all that necessary?" The question hit Frank like a physical blow. He had been so focused on justice, on making Denise and Lawrence pay for what they'd planned to do to him, that he hadn't fully considered how the public nature of their downfall would affect his children. "I thought I was protecting our family," Frank said carefully. "They were going to take you away, make you believe lies about me. And now everyone knows our business." Trevor's hockey coach asked if he needed special accommodations because of our family trauma. Tessa's voice broke. "He punched a wall in the locker room. Almost broke his hand." Frank felt a stab of guilt. His campaign for justice had become a crusade, expanding beyond self-defense into something darker. The collateral damage was mounting, and his children were bearing too much of it. That night, Frank sat alone in his home office, surrounded by the files and evidence he had meticulously compiled. He opened his laptop and began systematically deleting folders, clearing caches, removing the digital trail of Operation Scorched Earth. A text from Dale interrupted him. "FBI contacted me about Brenda's testimony. They're expanding the investigation into hospital administration. You sure you want to pull back now?" Frank stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "Yes. Enough damage done. Time to rebuild, not destroy." The following morning, Frank contacted Miles with new instructions. "I want to settle the divorce quickly, quietly. Generous terms, minimal publicity." Miles was surprised. "Frank, we have them on the ropes. Denise has no leverage left." "This isn't about leverage anymore," Frank replied. "It's about my kids being able to graduate without reporters on the school lawn." The settlement Frank proposed was indeed generous. Denise would receive a fair financial package and flexible visitation, though primary custody would remain with Frank. In exchange, all parties would sign non-disclosure agreements regarding the details of the separation. When Miles presented the offer to Denise's new attorney, the response was immediate acceptance. Denise, facing professional ruin and social ostracism, was desperate for any resolution that wouldn't further damage her relationship with the twins. The divorce was finalized quietly, with minimal court appearances. The FBI investigation continued, but Frank declined to provide additional information or testimony, focusing instead on creating stability for Trevor and Tessa in their final year of high school. Lawrence Whitfield was not so fortunate. Without Frank actively pushing, the medical fraud investigation might have eventually stalled, but Lawrence made a critical error. He attempted to flee to Canada with falsified identification and nearly $200,000 in cash. Arrested at the border, he now faced additional charges of attempted flight to avoid prosecution. As summer turned to fall, and fall to winter, the Mercer household gradually established a new normal. Frank adjusted his work schedule to be home when the twins returned from school. Weekend dinners became a tradition, sometimes including Dale and his wife, or Brenda Okafor, who had found a new nursing position at a different hospital and had become an unexpected friend to the family. Frank focused on healing, his own and his children's. He arranged therapy for all three of them, individually and as a family unit. He supported Trevor's college applications to hockey programs and helped Tessa rebuild her photography portfolio after she discovered a passion for documentary work. By spring, the worst of the storm had passed. The twins were focused on graduation and college plans. Denise had maintained her visitation schedule and was slowly rebuilding her relationship with her children, having accepted a nursing position at a clinic in Massachusetts. Frank himself had changed, hardened in some ways, more compassionate in others. The betrayal had left scars, but he refused to let it define him or his family's future. He had won the war, but recognized that sometimes victory comes at too high a price. What he didn't know was that the final battle was yet to come, and it would arrive in the form of a man with nothing left to lose. Chapter 7. Ghosts Returning. May brought college acceptance letters, prom preparations, and an unexpected visitor to Frank's construction site. He was reviewing blueprints with his foreman when the site manager approached, looking uncomfortable. "There's someone asking for you at the trailer. Says it's urgent, personal business." Frank found Philip Bennett waiting, looking considerably older than he had 6 months earlier. The former hospital board chairman had avoided charges in the larger investigation, but had lost his position and much of his social standing. "Frank," Philip nodded stiffly. "I need 5 minutes of your time." Inside the privacy of the site trailer, Philip didn't waste words. "Lawrence Whitfield made bail yesterday. His trial's been postponed again." Frank set down his coffee mug carefully. "That's not my concern anymore, Philip." "It should be. He's unhinged, Frank. Completely obsessed with you. Blames you for everything. His career, his reputation, his freedom. He's made statements." "Threats, you mean?" Philip nodded grimly. "To anyone who'll listen. Most people dismiss it as the ranting of a desperate man, but I've known Lawrence for 15 years. He doesn't make idle threats." Frank considered this information, thinking of the twins at home preparing for graduation in 2 weeks. "Why are you telling me this, Philip? Our last interaction wasn't exactly friendly." Philip looked away. "I was complicit in things I shouldn't have been. Lawrence had information about certain financial irregularities I'd approved. Nothing criminal, but embarrassing enough to make me susceptible to pressure. So this is what, your conscience? Call it repayment of a debt. Lawrence Whitfield is dangerous, Frank. He's got nothing left to lose." After Philip left, Frank called Miles for confirmation about Lawrence's bail status. Then he contacted Dale, who still had connections with hospital security. "Need to borrow some equipment," Frank explained vaguely. "Just precautionary." Dale arrived that evening with a duffel bag containing security cameras, motion sensors, and other surveillance equipment. "You really think he'd come after you?" Frank began unpacking the gear. "Better to be prepared. The twins' graduation is in 2 weeks. Then they'll be away at hockey camp and photography workshop all summer. I just need to secure things until then." Dale helped install the security system, neither man acknowledging the growing sense of unease. When they finished, Dale clasped Frank's shoulder. "You've rebuilt well, brother. Don't let him take that from you." Frank nodded, surveying the home he had fought so hard to keep. "I won't." For the next week, Frank maintained hypervigilance, varying his routes to work, checking the security feeds remotely throughout the day, keeping the twins close without alarming them about the potential threat. Lawrence made no appearance, and gradually Frank began to wonder if Philip's warning had been exaggerated. Then came the anonymous flower delivery to Tessa during her final exam period. Exotic blooms with a card reading only, "Congratulations on your graduation. Your future awaits." No signature, no return address, just Tessa's school information with perfect accuracy. Frank had the flowers tested. They contained no dangerous substances, just an unsettling reminder that Lawrence knew the twins' schedules and locations. Frank doubled his security measures and contacted Miles about a restraining order, but without direct evidence linking Lawrence to the flowers, legal options were limited. 3 days before graduation, Trevor's car was vandalized in the school parking lot. Tires slashed, a crude message scratched into the paint. "Ask your father about justice." School security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the incident. Frank filed police reports, but without witnesses or clear evidence, little could be done. He arranged for the twins to stay with Dale's family until graduation, citing renovation work at the house as an excuse. The night before graduation, Frank sat alone in his kitchen, cleaning his old service pistol, legally registered and stored in a fingerprint-locked safe since his return from the military. The house was quiet, empty without the twins' presence, and Frank found himself replaying Philip's warning on a loop in his mind. The soft click of the back door latch breaking was almost anticlimactic after days of tension. Frank remained seated, the pistol now reassembled on the table before him, as Lawrence Whitfield stepped into the kitchen. "You should upgrade your locks, Frank," Lawrence said conversationally, as if they were colleagues meeting for coffee. He looked drastically different from the polished surgeon of a year ago, gaunt, unshaven, with eyes that burned with a feverish intensity. "They were upgraded," Frank replied calmly. "You broke the frame, not the lock." Lawrence glanced at the gun on the table, but made no move toward it. "Aren't you going to ask why I'm here?" "I know why you're here, Lawrence. The question is what you hope to accomplish." Lawrence laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Accomplish? You've left me nothing to accomplish, Frank. Career gone. Reputation destroyed. Freedom hanging by a thread. I'm just here to return the favor. By breaking into my empty house." Frank asked, his voice steady. "The twins aren't here." Lawrence circled the kitchen island, maintaining distance from both Frank and the gun. "I know. They're at your friend Dale's house. The black guy with the security business, right? Wife named Tamara? Nice colonial on Oak Ridge Drive." Frank's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You've been busy." "Thorough," Lawrence corrected, pulling out a chair across from Frank and sitting as if invited. "Just like you were. Very thorough in dismantling my life piece by piece." "You and Denise planned to do the same to me," Frank reminded him. "False allegations, manipulated court orders, alienating my children." Lawrence waved dismissively. "Business. Divorce is always messy." "Business," Frank echoed. Interesting word for attempting to destroy a man's relationship with his children. Lawrence leaned forward, his eyes fever-bright. "Let me tell you what destruction really looks like, Frank. It's waking up to FBI agents seizing your medical licenses. It's watching patients you've saved cross the street to avoid you. It's having your face on the evening news labeled Doctor Under Investigation. It's prosecutors offering your colleagues immunity to testify against you. Consequences," Frank corrected, "for your own actions. Orchestrated." Lawrence slammed his fist on the table, making the gun jump. "You orchestrated all of it. Somehow you found every weakness, every shortcut, every mistake I ever made, and weaponized it. You turned Philip against me, convinced Brenda to testify, even got to Judge Calloway." Frank remained motionless, his military training evident in his controlled breathing and alert posture. "I didn't create your misconduct, Lawrence. I just made sure it couldn't be buried anymore." Lawrence's laugh was brittle. Such righteousness from a man who strategically destroyed lives. "I protected what was mine," Frank stated simply. Lawrence's eyes narrowed. "And now I'll take what remains." He reached slowly into his jacket pocket and withdrew not a weapon, but a manila envelope, sliding it across the table. "Graduation present for the twins." Frank didn't touch the envelope. "What is this?" "The complete truth, Frank. Every detail of what their father did to orchestrate my downfall and their mother's humiliation. All the manipulation, the covert recordings, the strategic relationships you cultivated solely for revenge. How you used their pain as collateral damage in your war." Frank's expression hardened. "You think my children don't know I fought for them?" "They know you fought," Lawrence agreed. "But do they know how? The calculated brutality? The cold precision? Do they know their father is capable of systematically destroying lives while smiling and asking about homework?" For the first time, Frank felt a flicker of genuine concern. The twins understood the broad strokes of what had happened, but not the detailed mechanics of his counterattack. Not the darker moments when vengeance had driven him as much as justice. "I'll be at their graduation tomorrow," Lawrence continued, standing slowly. "Front row. I've got nothing left to lose, Frank. But you? You still have their respect to lose. Their trust. Their belief in who you are. If you come near my children," Frank began, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You'll what?" Lawrence challenged. "Kill me? Add murder to the list of revelations? I don't think so. You're too calculating for that." He moved toward the broken door. "Sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't violence, Frank. It's truth." After Lawrence left, Frank sat motionless for nearly 10 minutes, staring at the unopened envelope. Finally, he reached for it, sliding out several printed pages, a meticulously documented timeline of Frank's every move since discovering the affair, including private conversations, legally questionable surveillance, and the orchestrated downfall of Lawrence's career and reputation. Frank read it twice before reaching for his phone to call Miles. Instead, his hand froze mid-motion as he realized something critical. Lawrence's documented truth was incomplete. It contained facts, but missed the fundamental motivation: Frank's love for his children and his desperate fight to remain their father. Frank put the papers back in the envelope and locked them in his safe, alongside the gun he hadn't needed to use. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. Tonight, he needed to prepare a different kind of defense. Chapter 8: Graduation Day. The Bradford Academy graduation ceremony was held in the school's sprawling quad, white chairs arranged in neat rows beneath a cloudless June sky. Frank arrived early with Dale and Tamara Washington, scanning the gathering crowd with practiced vigilance. "You sure you don't want me to call in some of my security guys?" Dale asked quietly as they claimed seats near the front. Frank shook his head. "No, this is a family day. I won't let him militarize it." Graduates in royal blue robes began filtering into their designated area, parents waving and snapping photos. Frank spotted Tessa and Trevor among them. Tessa's robe adorned with honors cords, Trevor's with his varsity athletics medal. Despite everything, they had thrived. Pride swelled in Frank's chest, momentarily displacing his anxiety about Lawrence's threatened appearance. The ceremony began with the traditional processional, the school orchestra playing pomp and circumstance as faculty members took their places on the stage. Frank continued scanning the audience, finally spotting Lawrence slipping into a seat near the back, sunglasses hiding his eyes, but his silver hair unmistakable. Frank's phone vibrated with a text from Miles. "In position. Just say the word." Miles and two private security contractors were stationed discreetly around the perimeter, a precaution Frank had arranged despite his reassurances to Dale. He wasn't taking chances with his children's safety, no matter how personal Lawrence's vendetta might be. The ceremony progressed through speeches and awards. Trevor was recognized for his hockey scholarship to Boston College, and Tessa for her photography portfolio that had earned her admission to NYU's prestigious Tisch School of the Arts. Each time his children crossed the stage, Frank found himself holding his breath, eyes darting to Lawrence's still figure in the distance. Denise arrived mid-ceremony, slipping into a seat several rows behind Frank. They had agreed to separate celebrations, Frank hosting the main family gathering after graduation, Denise taking the twins to dinner the following evening. Their fragile détente had held through the divorce finalization, both parents prioritizing the twins' well-being over lingering resentments. As the principal began calling graduates by name to receive their diplomas, Frank noticed Lawrence standing and moving toward the side of the seating area. Frank tensed, hand moving to his phone to alert Miles, but Lawrence merely repositioned himself for a better view, the manila envelope visible in his hand. When Tessa Marie Mercer was called, Frank rose with his camera, capturing his daughter's radiant smile as she accepted her diploma. Next came Trevor Francis Mercer, standing tall and confident as he crossed the stage. Frank's eyes misted unexpectedly, his children, survivors like him, emerging stronger from the crucible of the past year. As the ceremony concluded and graduates dispersed to find their families amidst cheers and embraces, Frank saw Lawrence moving purposefully through the crowd, envelope extended, heading directly toward Trevor and Tessa. Frank intercepted him mere feet from his children. "Don't," he said quietly, firmly positioning himself as a barrier. "They deserve the truth, Frank," Lawrence replied, loud enough for nearby attendees to glance over curiously. "Dad," Tessa called, threading through the crowd with Trevor close behind. "Is everything okay?" Lawrence smiled thinly. "Perfect timing. I brought you both a graduation gift." "They don't want anything from you," Frank stated flatly. Trevor stepped forward, his 6-foot hockey player's frame imposing as he positioned himself protectively beside his sister. "What are you doing here? Haven't you done enough damage to our family?" Lawrence's rehearsed composure faltered at the direct confrontation from the young man. "I'm here to make sure you know exactly what your father did." "We know what he did," Tessa interrupted, her voice clear and carrying. "He fought for us when you and Mom tried to take us away from him." Lawrence thrust the envelope toward them. "You don't know everything. The recordings, the setups, the systematic destruction." "Stop," came a firm voice from behind them. Denise stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Lawrence, leave my children alone." Parents and students had begun to gather at the edges of the confrontation, whispers spreading. Frank saw Miles moving closer through the crowd, ready to intervene. Lawrence turned on Denise, his careful facade cracking. "Your children? You were ready to move them across the country, away from everything they knew." Trevor took the envelope from Lawrence's hand, opening it as the confrontation escalated. He quickly scanned the first page, then passed it to Tessa, whose photography-trained eyes took in the details rapidly. Frank watched his children reading, his heart sinking. This wasn't how he'd wanted them to learn the full extent of his actions, the surveillance, the strategic manipulations, the calculated dismantling of Lawrence and Denise's plan. He had protected them from these details, wanting to preserve some innocence amid the divorce's ugliness. "You recorded Mom's conversations?" Trevor asked, looking up at Frank with confusion. "You infiltrated the hospital board?" Tessa added, her brow furrowed. Frank stepped closer to his children, ignoring Lawrence's triumphant expression. "Yes, after I discovered their plans to take you away and make you believe I was dangerous. I did what I needed to do to protect our family." "By any means necessary," Lawrence interjected venomously. Tessa reread a section of the document, then looked directly at Lawrence. "It says here you falsified medical records to cover up surgical complications. 3 patients nearly died." Lawrence flushed. "That's not. And Judge Calloway was taking bribes to rule in your favor." Trevor continued, flipping a page. "You weren't exposed because of Dad. You were exposed because you were corrupt." Lawrence's righteous anger deflated visibly as he realized his truth bomb was backfiring. "Your father wasn't fighting for justice. He was executing calculated revenge." Frank met his children's questioning gazes steadily. "I was fighting for you. For us. Yes. I recorded conversations after discovering their plans. Yes. I cultivated relationships to uncover the truth. And yes, when I found evidence of corruption and malpractice, I made sure it reached the right authorities." "You ruined my life," Lawrence hissed. "You endangered patients' lives," Tessa countered, her voice rising with indignation. "You were going to use false allegations about PTSD to take us away from our father." The crowd around them had grown, with faculty members now pushing through to investigate the disturbance. Lawrence, realizing his moment of revenge had transformed into public humiliation, grabbed for the documents in Trevor's hands. "Give those back." Trevor easily sidestepped the older man's lunge, his athletic training evident in his quick reflexes. "I think we'll keep these, thanks. Might be useful for the FBI investigation." Lawrence's face contorted with rage. "You're just like your father, manipulative, self-righteous." "Enough." Denise's voice cut through the tension. She stepped between Lawrence and the twins, her expression fierce with maternal protection. "You used me to get at my family. You convinced me Frank was the enemy when you were the real threat all along." Lawrence recoiled as if slapped. "Denise, we had plans. Plans based on lies," she responded coldly. "I've lost enough because of those lies. I won't let you hurt my children too." The school principal had arrived with security, moving to disperse the gathering crowd and address the disruption of the ceremony. As Lawrence was escorted from the grounds, protesting his treatment, Frank turned to face his children, uncertain of what he would find in their expressions. Trevor handed the documents back to his father, his face solemn but clear-eyed. "You could have told us the whole truth, Dad. I wanted to protect you from the ugliest parts," Frank admitted. Tessa slipped her arm through her father's. "We're not kids anymore. We can handle the truth, even the messy parts." Denise stood awkwardly at the edge of their family circle, her place uncertain after months of separation. Frank surprised himself by extending his hand toward her, including her in the moment. "We should take some photos," he suggested quietly. "All of us together. For the twins." As they posed for graduation pictures, Dale stepping in as photographer, Frank felt something shift within him. The armor he had built during the past year's battles began to loosen, not falling away entirely, but adjusting to a world where survival no longer required constant vigilance. Lawrence's attempt to weaponize the truth had failed because he had fundamentally misunderstood what drove Frank Mercer. Not revenge, but protection. Not destruction, but preservation. The twins recognized this distinction instantly, seeing through Lawrence's narrative to the core motivation that had guided their father through the darkest period of their family's life. Chapter 9. truths, and consequences. The graduation reception at Frank's house stretched into evening, with extended family, neighbors, and the twins' friends filling the backyard. Frank had transformed the space with string lights, tables laden with catered food, and a banner celebrating the twins' achievements and college acceptances. Denise had initially planned to make only a brief appearance, but found herself lingering as old friends welcomed her without the expected coldness. The community had ultimately judged her less harshly than Lawrence, recognizing her contrition and efforts to repair her relationship with her children. As twilight descended, Frank found himself standing alone by the grill, watching his children at the center of their social circles. Trevor with his hockey teammates, Tessa with her photography club friends. Dale approached, offering a cold beer. "You did it, brother," Dale said, clinking bottles in a quiet toast. "Got them through the storm." Frank nodded, his eyes still on the twins. "Almost lost them today. If they'd believed Lawrence's version." "But they didn't," Dale reminded him. "Because despite everything, you raised them right. They can spot the difference between vengeance and justice." The graduation confrontation had been followed by a private family conversation in the principal's office, where Frank had finally shared the complete truth with the twins, including the darker aspects of his campaign against Lawrence and Denise that weren't in Lawrence's documents. The painful transparency had been necessary, a foundation for their relationship moving forward. "Dad," Trevor had said during that difficult conversation, "we know you're not perfect, but you fought for us without giving up. That's what matters." Now, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Frank noticed Denise sitting alone at a corner table, watching the proceedings with a mixture of wistfulness and gratitude. After a moment's hesitation, he joined her. "Thank you," he said simply, "for what you did today with Lawrence." Denise traced the condensation on her water glass. "I should have done it a year ago. Stood up to him, seen him for what he was." "We all have blind spots when it comes to people we think we love," Frank offered, surprising himself with the absence of bitterness in his voice. Denise looked up at him, eyes glistening. "I destroyed our family, Frank. I can never fix that." "No," he agreed. "But we can build something new from the pieces. Something that still gives the twins the support they need." As they sat in contemplative silence, Tessa approached with her camera. "Can I get a picture of you two? For my family portrait series." Frank and Denise exchanged glances, then moved closer together, posing awkwardly until Tessa directed them. "Maybe just talk to each other naturally while I shoot," she suggested, adjusting her lens. "Trevor's going to need winter gear for Boston," Frank offered, finding neutral ground. Denise nodded. "And Tessa needs a decent laptop for design work at NYU." As they discussed practical matters of their children's futures, Tessa captured the moment. Two people irrevocably changed by betrayal and conflict, finding a way to collaborate in the aftermath. Not reconciliation, but reconstruction. Later, after the last guests had departed and Denise had left for her apartment, Frank sat with the twins on the back porch, the remnants of celebration scattered around them. "So what happens now?" Trevor asked, slouching comfortably in his chair. "With Lawrence's trial and everything?" Frank considered the question carefully. "The legal process will continue. My lawyer says they've built a strong case without needing much more from us." "And Mom?" Tessa inquired cautiously. "She's trying," Frank acknowledged. "That counts for something." Trevor studied his father's profile in the dim porch light. "And you, Dad? What's next for you?" Frank hadn't allowed himself to consider this question in months, so focused had he been on guiding the twins through their senior year and the divorce aftermath. "I'm not sure yet. Work, the house, supporting you both through college." "That's not what he meant," Tessa said gently. "What about you? Your life, beyond being our dad." Frank felt something loosen in his chest, permission to think beyond survival mode for the first time in over a year. "I might take on that veterans housing project Dale mentioned. Use my construction background for something meaningful." "You should," Trevor encouraged. "You'd be good at that." They sat in comfortable silence until Trevor spoke again, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Those envelopes Lawrence brought today, they didn't change how we see you, Dad. You know that, right?" Frank looked at his son, so grown now, a man on the verge of his own independent life. "I hoped they wouldn't, but I wasn't sure. I did things I'm not proud of." "To protect us," Tessa affirmed. "There's a difference between being vengeful and being protective." Frank thought of the difference between his initial defensive actions and the later offensive campaign, the line he had nearly crossed before pulling back for his children's sake. Sometimes the line gets blurry. But you found it again, Trevor pointed out. You could have kept going, destroyed them completely. But you stopped. Offered Mom a fair settlement. Backed off when you saw how it was affecting us. Frank hadn't realized they had noticed these decisions, these moments of choosing restraint over retribution. I never wanted to become someone you couldn't recognize. Tessa reached for her father's hand. That's why Lawrence failed today. He thought exposing your methods would make us see you differently. But we already know who you are, Dad. The good and the bad. And the ugly, Trevor added with a half-smile. Frank chuckled despite himself. Definitely some ugly in there. As the conversation drifted to summer plans and college preparations, Frank felt the weight of the past year settling into perspective. He had fought a war on multiple fronts, legal, professional, personal, and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. The costs had been high, but not as devastating as they might have been had he allowed vengeance to fully consume him. 2 weeks later, Frank stood in the courthouse corridor after providing final testimony in Lawrence's medical fraud trial. The disgraced surgeon had ultimately agreed to a plea deal, facing significant prison time and permanent loss of his medical license. As Frank prepared to leave, he found himself face to face with Lawrence, being led to processing by court officers. Lawrence paused, his defeated eyes meeting Frank's. "Congratulations," he said flatly. "You won." Frank shook his head slowly. "This isn't about winning, Lawrence." "It never was." "Then what was it about?" Lawrence asked, genuine confusion breaking through his resentment. Frank considered the question, thinking of the graduation day confrontation, of the twins heading off to summer programs, of Denise's careful attempts to rebuild trust with her children, of his own slow healing. "Consequences," he finally answered, echoing their conversation from the kitchen confrontation. "Natural consequences for the choices we all made." As Lawrence was led away, Frank stepped outside into the summer sunshine, checking his phone to find texts from both twins. Trevor sharing hockey camp updates from Boston. Tessa sending photographs from her workshop in New York. A separate message from Denise confirmed their planned co-parenting check-in for the weekend. Frank replied to each message, then called Dale to confirm their meeting with the Veterans Housing Project coordinator that afternoon. Life was continuing, evolving beyond the crucible of betrayal and revenge that had consumed the past year. On the twins' graduation day, Frank had indeed handed them each an envelope, not filled with Lawrence's distorted version of events, but containing letters he had written detailing his journey from betrayal to understanding, from rage to acceptance. The truth, but framed in love rather than vindictiveness. Along with the letters were keys to their respective first apartments near their colleges, co-signed and subsidized by Frank to give them a stable start to their adult lives. The court transcripts Lawrence had threatened to reveal had ultimately proven unnecessary. Frank had already shared the essential truths with his children, allowing them to form their own judgments about all the adults involved in the painful chapter of their family history. As he walked to his truck, Frank thought about the many forms justice could take, the legal consequences Lawrence now faced, the professional repercussions Denise had endured, the personal growth Frank himself had been forced to undergo. None of it had restored what was lost, but something new had emerged from the wreckage, something tempered by fire, but not consumed by it. Frank Mercer had protected what mattered most, not through perfect choices or unblemished methods, but through persistent love and the wisdom to know when the fight was truly over. The war that had begun with betrayal had ended not with destruction, but with truth, complicated, messy, and ultimately healing. As he drove away from the courthouse for the final time, Frank rolled down the windows and felt the summer breeze against his face. Ahead lay college drop-offs, holiday negotiations, graduation ceremonies, and all the complex logistics of their new family configuration. Behind lay the battlefield where he had nearly lost himself in the pursuit of justice. Between past and future stretched the present moment, the only one that truly mattered. And for the first time in over a year, Frank Mercer found himself driving towards something rather than away from loss. The road ahead was uncertain, but he would travel it with hard-won wisdom and the knowledge that he had emerged from fire not just intact, but transformed. Epilogue, 7 years later. The October morning air carried a crisp bite as Frank Mercer climbed the steps of the newly completed Veterans Transitional Housing Complex in Hartford. At 54, the years had added distinguished silver to his temples, but his physical presence remained imposing, the discipline of his military days still evident in his posture and fitness regimen. He paused at the entrance, allowing himself a moment to appreciate what they had accomplished here. 36 units of dignified housing for veterans transitioning from homelessness or rehabilitation programs to independent living. Running late for your own ribbon cutting, boss? Dale Washington emerged from the building, clipboard in hand, his hair now completely gray but his smile as wide as ever. Frank checked his watch. 20 minutes early, as usual, which is 10 minutes late in Frank Mercer time. Dale countered, clapping his friend on the shoulder. The mayor's already inside. So is the press. The past 7 years had transformed their friendship into a successful business partnership. Mercer Washington Development had started with small veterans housing projects and expanded into a respected firm specializing in community-focused construction throughout Connecticut and parts of Massachusetts. Their niche, combining Frank's construction expertise with Dale's security and technology background, had proven surprisingly profitable while maintaining their commitment to giving back to fellow veterans. Inside the building's community room, Frank navigated through clusters of politicians, funders, and reporters with practiced ease. Public speaking had once been a source of discomfort, but necessity had made him proficient. As he approached the podium for the ceremony, he caught sight of a familiar figure slipping in through the side door. Trevor, now 25, his broad hockey player's build filling out a well-tailored suit. Frank's face broke into a genuine smile. Trevor had promised to try making the ceremony, but his demanding schedule as a physical therapist for the Providence Bruins made his attendance uncertain. Frank adjusted his prepared remarks, adding an acknowledgement of his son's professional work with injured veterans through the team's community outreach program. The ceremony proceeded efficiently, Frank's preference for any public event, with brief speeches, the ceremonial ribbon cutting, and scheduled tours of the facility. As the official portion concluded and attendees mingled over coffee, Trevor made his way to his father. Not bad for a guy who used to just pour concrete, Trevor teased, embracing Frank warmly. Says the kid who used to think a hockey stick was only for scoring goals, Frank returned, pride evident in his voice. Trevor's journey from college athlete to healthcare professional working with wounded warriors had been unexpected but deeply gratifying. Tessa sends her apologies, Trevor said, accepting coffee from a circulating volunteer. Her flight from Berlin got delayed. She'll be at the house tonight, though. Frank nodded, unsurprised. Tessa's photography career had exploded in the past 2 years, her documentary work on displaced families gaining international recognition. At 25, identical in age but 7 minutes younger than her twin, she had already published 2 books of photography and earned a prestigious Magnum Photos Fellowship. How long are you both staying? Frank asked, guiding Trevor toward a quieter corner of the room. I've got 4 days before I need to get back to Providence. Tessa's between assignments, so she's thinking a week, maybe more. Trevor hesitated, his expression shifting. Mom's coming to dinner tomorrow, if that's still okay. Frank's face remained neutral. Of course. We confirmed last week. The complex family dynamics that had emerged from the divorce had evolved over 7 years into something unexpected. Not friendship between Frank and Denise, exactly, but a functional, respectful coexistence centered around their now-adult children. Major holidays, graduations, and significant life events were navigated with careful coordination and civil interactions. The twins had made it clear early on that they refused to choose between parents, and both Frank and Denise had adapted accordingly. Denise had rebuilt her life with quiet determination after the divorce. She had relocated to Worcester, Massachusetts, retrained as a hospice nurse, and eventually became the director of end-of-life care at a respected medical center. She had dated occasionally but never remarried, focusing instead on healing her relationship with her children and finding meaning in her work with terminal patients. As for Lawrence Whitfield, his story had taken a darker turn. Convicted of multiple counts of medical fraud and falsification of records, he had served 4 years in federal prison before being released on parole. Attempts to rebuild any semblance of his former life had faltered. His medical license permanently revoked, his reputation destroyed, his financial resources depleted by legal fees and settlements. Last Frank had heard, Lawrence was working at a medical billing company in Arizona, far from the prestigious surgical career he had once commanded. Earth to Dad. Trevor's voice pulled Frank back to the present. You drifted off there. Frank refocused. Just thinking about the journey. Didn't expect to be here 7 years ago. Trevor nodded, understanding the layers in his father's statement. None of us did. But here we are. The remainder of the event passed quickly, with Frank and Dale fielding questions from potential partners and accepting congratulations from community leaders. By mid-afternoon, they were finally able to break away, Frank driving Trevor back to the house that had once been the center of their family's unraveling and had since been transformed into something new. You've changed things again, Trevor observed as they pulled into the driveway of the Colonial in Westbrook. The landscaping had been completely redesigned since his last visit, with raised vegetable gardens replacing the traditional shrubs and new stone pathways curving through native plantings. Working with a veteran who started a sustainable landscaping business, Frank explained. The therapy gardens at the facilities have been so successful we decided to implement the concept here. Inside, the house bore little resemblance to the one from Trevor and Tessa's high school years. Frank had gradually renovated each space, creating a home that reflected his evolving life rather than preserving a museum to the past. The formal dining room had become a combination library and office. The living room now featured comfortable, practical furniture centered around a stone fireplace that Frank had rebuilt himself during the year after the twins left for college. You're cooking? Trevor asked with mock alarm, noticing preparation work in the kitchen. Frank smiled. Brenda's coming over to help. She doesn't trust me with anything beyond grilling. Brenda Okafor had remained in Frank's life, their initial connection over Lawrence Whitfield's medical misconduct evolving into a close friendship and, for the past 3 years, a committed relationship. Her direct, no-nonsense approach complemented Frank's reserved nature, and her experiences as a nurse who had stood up against corruption gave her a unique understanding of the moral complexities Frank had navigated. How are things with you two? Trevor asked, grabbing a water bottle from the refrigerator. Good. Stable. Frank set out cutting boards and ingredients. She's applying for the director of nursing position at Hartford Memorial. You still not living together? Trevor probed gently. Frank gave his son a measured look. We each have our homes. We each have our independence. It works for us. The truth was more nuanced than Frank expressed. Both he and Brenda carried scars from their past relationships, his from betrayal, hers from an earlier marriage to an abusive doctor who had used his professional status to discredit her concerns when she tried to leave. Their relationship had developed with deliberate slowness, built on mutual respect and clear boundaries. Speaking of relationships, Frank continued, turning the conversation away from himself. How's Alexis? Trevor's expression brightened at the mention of his girlfriend of 2 years, a sports nutritionist he had met through work. Actually, that's one reason I wanted to make sure I was here in person. He set down his water bottle, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable than his 25 years. I'm going to ask her to marry me. Next month, when we go to Vermont for her birthday. Frank stopped his food preparation, giving his son his full attention. That's significant news. I know it might seem fast. 2 years isn't fast, Frank interrupted gently. And I've seen how you are together. She's good for you. Relief washed over Trevor's face. Thanks, Dad. Your opinion matters to me. Have you told your mother? Trevor shook his head. I wanted to tell you first. I'll tell Mom tomorrow at dinner, and Tessa tonight when she gets in. Frank nodded, respect and gratitude for his son's thoughtfulness filling him. Neither he nor Denise had ever pressured the twins to take sides or show preferential treatment in the aftermath of the divorce, but the consideration Trevor was showing demonstrated his understanding of the complex emotional terrain. The ring? Frank asked, resuming his cooking preparations. Trevor pulled out his phone, showing Frank photos of a vintage-inspired emerald and diamond setting. It was actually Grandma Mercer's. You probably don't remember, but you gave it to me when I turned 18. Said someday I might need it. Frank's hands stilled again. His mother's ring, the one she had left him after battling cancer throughout his childhood, the one he had kept safeguarded through his military service and had given to Trevor in one of those quiet father-son moments that seemed insignificant at the time. I remember, he said softly. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted the emotional moment. Trevor moved to the window. "It's Tessa," he exclaimed, heading for the door. Frank watched through the kitchen window as the twins reunited on the front lawn, Trevor lifting his sister in a bear hug that spun her around despite her protests, their laughter visible even if inaudible from inside. Tessa's hair was shorter now, a practical bob that suited her frequent travels, but her animated gestures and expressive face remained unchanged from childhood. As they entered the house together, Frank was struck by the adults his children had become, confident, compassionate, successful in their chosen fields. Despite the turmoil of their teenage years, they had emerged not just intact but thriving. Whatever mistakes he and Denise had made in their marriage and its dissolution, they had somehow managed not to break what mattered most. "Dad," Tessa embraced him fiercely, smelling of airplane and unfamiliar places. "The Berlin exhibit was incredible. I have so much to tell you." "Later," Frank suggested, returning her hug. "Get settled first. Brenda will be here soon, and dinner's at 7. Tessa nodded and headed upstairs to the room Frank maintained for her visits, while Trevor resumed his position as self-appointed sous chef. The familiar rhythm of family returning home settled over the house, filling spaces that sometimes echoed with emptiness when Frank was alone. Dinner that evening extended late into the night, with Tessa sharing stories from her international assignments and Trevor discussing his work with injured players and veterans. Brenda contributed her own medical perspectives, her rapport with the twins easy and natural after years of careful relationship building. Frank mostly listened, occasionally asking questions or offering observations, but primarily absorbing the moment, storing it against the quieter days that would follow their departures. When Brenda finally left around midnight, promising to return for the family dinner with Denise the following evening, Frank found himself alone with his children for the first time in months. They migrated to the back porch, wrapped in blankets against the October chill, a tradition established during their college years when home visits became precious and infrequent. "I have news," Trevor announced, having waited for this private moment to share his engagement plans with his sister. Tessa's reaction was everything her exuberant personality promised: excitement, questions, demands to see ring photos, and immediate offers to document the proposal and eventual wedding. "This is huge, Trev. I'm so happy for you." As the twins discussed wedding possibilities, Frank watched them with quiet contentment. This was the outcome he had fought for 7 years ago. His children happy, pursuing their passions, building their own lives while maintaining their connection to family. The cost had been high, but moments like this confirmed the value of the battle. "Dad seems suspiciously quiet about all this wedding talk," Tessa observed, turning her attention to her father. "Having second thoughts about Alexis?" Frank shook his head. "Alexis is wonderful. I was just thinking about journeys, where we started and where we ended up. Getting philosophical in your old age?" Trevor teased. "Reflective," Frank corrected. 7 years ago, we were sitting on this same porch after your graduation, trying to figure out what came next after everything fell apart. I couldn't have imagined this future then." Tessa's expression softened. "You were still in survival mode." "We all were," Trevor added. Frank nodded. "It's strange how things unfold. The things you think will break you sometimes force you to build something stronger." Tessa leaned forward, her documentarian's instinct for significant moments activating. "Do you ever regret how you handled things? With Mom and Lawrence?" It was a question they revisited periodically as adults, their understanding evolving as they gained life experience and perspective. Frank considered it carefully, as he always did. "I regret the collateral damage," he acknowledged. "The public exposure that affected you both. Some of the darker impulses I gave in to temporarily." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "But protecting my relationship with you too? Fighting to remain your father when they tried to take that away? No, I don't regret that. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if you'd gone further?" Trevor asked. "If you hadn't pulled back when you saw how it was affecting us?" Frank's expression grew serious. "I'd have won the battle but lost the war. Become someone you couldn't respect or trust. Someone I couldn't live with being." Tessa nodded slowly. "I've been documenting these refugee families, watching parents make impossible choices to protect their children. It's made me think about your choices differently." "How so?" Frank asked. "The line between protection and destruction isn't always clear," she explained. "But the motivation matters. Your motivation was always us, even when your methods got questionable. Frank smiled slightly at her diplomatic phrasing. Very questionable at times. Trevor stretched, stifling a yawn. And what about you and Mom now? Tomorrow will be okay? Tomorrow will be fine, Frank assured him. Your mother and I found a way forward years ago. Not friendship, exactly, but peace. We focus on what we agree on, wanting the best for you too. It had been a long journey to that peace. The first year after the divorce had been tensely civil, interactions limited to necessary logistics regarding the twins. The second year had seen Denise's hesitant steps toward genuine apology, not just for the affair, but for the attempt to separate Frank from his children. The third year had brought collaborative problem-solving when Trevor suffered a serious hockey injury requiring surgery and extensive rehabilitation. Gradually, the sharp edges of betrayal had been worn smooth by time and by the shared project of supporting their children through early adulthood. Frank would never fully trust Denise again, but he had found a way to coexist with her without bitterness or resentment dominating the relationship. What about Lawrence? Tessa asked quietly. Do you ever hear anything? Frank shook his head. Not directly. Miles mentioned a while back that he tried to appeal his medical license revocation again. Denied. He sent me a message last year. Trevor revealed unexpectedly. Both Frank and Tessa turned to him in surprise. Through the clinic's professional contact form. Said he was working in medical coding and wanted to apologize for the impact his professional disagreement with Dad had on me. Professional disagreement, Tessa repeated incredulously. That's what he's calling it now. What did you do? Frank asked, careful to keep judgment from his tone. Trevor shrugged. Nothing. Deleted it. Some apologies come too late to matter. Frank studied his son, recognizing the measured response of a man who had made peace with his past without letting it dictate his future. Both twins had sought therapy during college to process the trauma of their family's implosion, emerging with remarkable emotional intelligence and resilience. Anyway, Tessa said, clearly ready to change the subject, I didn't just come home to see your handsome faces. I've been offered a major commission, a book documenting the veterans' housing initiatives across New England. Your projects would be featured prominently. Frank raised his eyebrows. That's quite an opportunity. It means I'd be stateside for at least 6 months, Tessa continued. Based here in Connecticut for most of it. 6 months. Trevor repeated. You haven't been in one place that long since college. Tessa tucked her legs underneath her in the chair. I know. It's a change of pace from the conflict zones and refugee work. But after 3 years of that, I'm ready for something. She searched for the right word. Healing. Something that showcases solutions rather than just documenting problems. Frank recognized the subtle shift in his daughter's professional focus. The move from documenting crisis to highlighting recovery. It mirrored his own journey from the defensive battles of 7 years ago to the constructive work of the Veterans Housing Project. The timing works out perfectly with Trevor's wedding plans too, Tessa added with a sly smile. Can't have my twin getting married without proper photographic documentation. As the conversation drifted to wedding plans and Tessa's project details, Frank felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with destruction was closing with creation. Trevor building a new family, Tessa documenting healing, Frank and Dale creating homes for those who had served. Even Denise had found her way to a form of redemption through her hospice work, bringing comfort to those at the end of life's journey. Their family narrative had transformed from one of betrayal and revenge to one of resilience and renewal. The following evening brought the promised family dinner with Denise. Frank had prepared the house with his usual attention to detail, creating a neutral, welcoming space. Brenda had offered to make herself scarce, but Frank had insisted on her presence, a statement about his current life and relationships that required no words. Denise arrived precisely on time, as had become her habit in the years since the divorce. At 52, she remained attractive, though the youthful vibrancy that had once defined her had matured into something more subdued. Her auburn hair now featured natural gray streaks she had chosen not to color, and her style had evolved from fashionable to practical elegance. Frank. She greeted him at the door with the slightly formal tone they maintained in direct interactions. Thank you for hosting. Of course, he responded, accepting the bottle of wine she offered. Tessa and Trevor are in the living room with Brenda. They're excited to see you. The careful choreography of their interactions had been established through years of practice. Polite distance, focus on the shared joy of their children, acknowledgement of each other's current lives without intrusion or pretense of friendship beyond what was necessary. Dinner progressed smoothly, with Trevor announcing his engagement plans to delighted congratulations from Denise. Discussion of potential wedding venues and dates dominated the conversation, providing safe, happy territory for all parties. "Have you told your parents yet, Alexis?" Denise asked, her nurse's instinct for others' comfort evident in her efforts to include Brenda in the family conversation. "Calling them tomorrow," Trevor replied. "They're on a cruise at the moment." And speaking of news, Tessa interjected, sharing details of her upcoming book project. "I'll be around for a while. Maybe we could do some of those day trips to the historic sites you're always suggesting, Mom." Denise's face lit up at the prospect of extended time with her daughter. "I'd love that." As the meal concluded and they moved to the living room for coffee, Frank found himself momentarily alone in the kitchen with Denise as they prepared a tray of desserts. "They've turned out wonderfully," Denise said quietly, nodding toward the living room where Trevor was showing Brenda something on his phone while Tessa laughed at whatever they were discussing. "They have," Frank agreed, arranging coffee cups. "Despite everything," Denise added, a hint of old remorse coloring her voice. Frank paused, considering his response carefully. Not despite, perhaps because of, in some ways. They learned early about resilience, about weathering storms. Denise looked at him directly, something she still did rarely. "I've never properly thanked you." Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. "For pulling back, when you could have destroyed everything completely." She arranged dessert forks with nervous energy. "I've worked with enough dying patients with regrets to recognize what a gift that was. You could have pursued total destruction, but you chose restraint." Frank absorbed her words, surprised by this acknowledgement after so many years. "It wasn't entirely altruistic. I saw how it was affecting them." "Still," Denise persisted. "Thank you." Frank nodded once, accepting the belated gratitude without further comment. Some conversations were best kept brief, even 7 years after the wounds had been inflicted. They rejoined the others, the moment of unusual directness giving way to the more comfortable patterns of their redefined family dynamics. As the evening progressed, Frank observed the intricate web of relationships in the room, the unbreakable bond between the twins, the healing connection between Denise and her children, the warm rapport Brenda had established with everyone, his own central role as both father and host. From the wreckage of betrayal, they had salvaged something worth preserving. Not the original structure, that had been damaged beyond repair, but something new built on the foundation that remained: love for Trevor and Tessa, commitment to their well-being, respect for their need to maintain relationships with both parents. Later, after Denise had departed and the twins had retreated to their rooms, Frank and Brenda sat on the back porch, wrapped in silence and the sounds of an October night. "That went well," Brenda observed, her hand finding his in the darkness. "It did," Frank agreed. Trevor's engagement news made it easier, gave everyone something positive to focus on. "You and Denise seemed to have a moment in the kitchen," Brenda noted without jealousy or concern, merely observation. Frank considered how to explain the brief exchange. A recognition of distance traveled. Nothing more. Brenda nodded, understanding. 7 years is a long time. People change, heal, gain perspective. "Some people," Frank amended, thinking of Lawrence's continued inability to accept responsibility for his own downfall. "Most people worth keeping in your life," Brenda clarified. They sat in comfortable silence until Brenda asked, "Will you ever fully forgive her?" It was a question she had never posed before, despite years of witnessing the complex family dynamics. Frank gave it the consideration it deserved. "I already have, in the ways that matter," he finally answered. "I don't carry anger anymore. I don't wish her ill. I respect her relationship with the twins and her efforts to rebuild." He paused, organizing his thoughts. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending something didn't happen. It doesn't erase consequences. Wisdom from the Mercer Philosophy Handbook. Brenda teased gently. Frank smiled in the darkness. Hard-earned lessons. Very hard-earned. As the night deepened around them, Frank reflected on the journey from that devastating moment 7 years ago when he had discovered Denise's betrayal and Lawrence's plot. The man he had been then, consumed by rage and determination to protect what was his, would hardly recognize the life he had now built. The veterans' housing projects, the reconciled relationship with his ex-wife, the flourishing adult children, the comfortable partnership with Brenda, none of these had been visible from the dark place where his journey began. Yet each had grown from seeds planted during that difficult time. His reconnection with his military background, his decision to prioritize his children's well-being over continued vengeance, his recognition of his own capacity for both destruction and creation. Penny, for your thoughts? Brenda asked, breaking the extended silence. Just thinking about journeys, Frank replied. How you never really know where they'll end up when you're in the middle of them. And are you pleased with where yours has led? Frank looked toward the house where his children slept, thinking of Trevor's plans for a new family, Tessa's evolving career, the meaningful work he and Dale had built, the unexpected relationship with Brenda that had brought companionship without demanding he abandon his hard-won independence. More than pleased, he answered honestly. Grateful. In the quiet Connecticut night, surrounded by the life he had rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, Frank Mercer acknowledged a final truth. The justice he had sought 7 years ago had evolved into something more profound than mere revenge or even vindication. It had become transformation, painful but necessary, destructive but ultimately generative. The price of betrayal had been high for everyone involved. But from that costly reckoning had emerged a legacy of resilience, forgiveness, and renewal that would shape generations to come, beginning with a wedding in Vermont, a book of healing images, and homes for those who had served. It was, Frank reflected as Brenda's hand tightened around his, a far better ending than he could have imagined during those darkest days, and a beginning none of them could have foreseen from the depths of their broken vows. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.